Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Geeks and Barbells. Today we are going to do another book talk, or more so, talk about booky things. And this is a topic I don't really hear a lot of people discussing, and that's because I think within the, we'll say, book sphere, booktube, many people just assume that, you know, you read a book, especially if you buy it, and you should just push yourself through it. You should force yourself to read a book. And if you can't make yourself go through it, if you're falling asleep, if you're getting tired, whatever it is, it's just, you just got to keep trying. And I think this is some of the worst advice I've ever heard. I have been reading books since I was a little baby, a little wee one, okay? And it was a way for me to kind of escape from things going on within my life. And I think a lot of people who start into reading when they're young are like that. They might not have such a good family situation or whatever it is in their life. Sometimes people just love books. You don't actually have to have a bad life to enjoy books. But many people have that initial start. I happen to also be lucky in that my mother was a huge book reader. Many of my uncles, especially one of my uncles, a huge book reader. My dad reads books. Everybody was kind of reading books in my life. But my mother especially was the big driving force. Her and her brother, my uncle, who read tons of fantasy, tons of other work. It's just huge. So when I was very young, I was reading The Wheel of Time. I read the Malazan books, a couple of them anyway. I read some really, really, really big fantasy books when I was very young, and I happened to have the lifestyle and the interest in it that drove me forward. And I maintained that interest until I was about 19. Actually, no, I was probably like 21 almost, where 99% of the books I read were fantasy and a little bit of sci fi. I did not try to read philosophy or science or anything else, it was just fantasy and sci-fi. So I was absorbed in these books. I loved them. And that's what built up this love of books. And then when I got to be about 21 and I started really being interested in health and fitness, I didn't get turned off by books that were a little bit more complicated or didn't interest me as much because I was so used to loving reading. It was a habit now. I could do it. I could push myself through it. I still had to be interested though. This is very important. Uh, if I started reading a book at the time, if it wasn't interesting to me, it would slow me down so much. But I would still push myself through. And I've started to think that this kind of advice, this kind of mentality, especially like, I don't want to waste my money or whatever it is that I did on this book, so I should just push myself through, is horrible for people. And it's horrible for people in two ways: people who read and people who are not readers. There are many people who do not read books, who never get into reading books because, one, school ruined it for them. Let's face it, school ruins reading for so many people because they're forced to read these boring textbooks constantly. They are forced to read stories they don't have any interest in. They're forced to read the classics, which, let's face it, unless you're interested in that kind of stuff, for most people the classics are boring as fuck. They are. Homer's Odyssey and the Iliad are not, they're not interesting books for many people, especially the style. It's dragged on. It's very difficult to read. So when you take people who don't have a natural inclination to reading and then you force them to read books like that, it does not expand their mind. It drives them crazy and makes them hate books. Most of the people I've met in my life have either never picked up a regular book to read or have tried once or twice and just don't have the energy for it. And every single time I've talked to them about it, it's the same thing. School has made me not want to read. And they have no more interest anymore. They're in their 20s and that's it. They've no more interest in books. So a big part of this blame has to do with the way school is set up and the way we force people to read things at a younger age. The second is, again, people are told that you just got to force your way through a book. No. If you are not interested in a book, okay, don't bother reading it. And this is extremely important to understand, and this is important for people who read a lot to understand also. We only have so much time on this earth. YOLO, okay? You only live once. You don't have time to waste forcing yourself through a book that is not worth your time reading. Does that mean, no, you have to be honest with yourself. Is it just because you have not built up the habit of reading and so you get dulled out by a book? That might play a part in it. So sometimes you do need to force yourself a little bit. But if the topic is not interesting to you, skim. Maybe there's parts of it. Let's say we're talking about a nonfiction book. So something, it's about a subject, psychology, science, whatever. Okay, you can flip through that shit. Just look for, if it's a book that is informational, don't waste your time. If it's making you fall asleep, you can't force it. Don't waste your time trying to force through the book. Flip through. Look at the titles of each section. Go pop through things. You might be able to pull out specific information, the actual stuff you need, without having to drag your way through the book. Don't waste your time doing that. Okay? Just look for the information you need. Take some notes if you need to, and then get rid of that fucking book. Okay? Don't make it kill your desire to read a book. After that, understand that fiction comes in so many different shapes and sizes, we can say, that it is impossible you cannot like reading overall. It's impossible. Even just within the sphere of fantasy, there are so many different kinds of fantasy books. It is insane. Okay? I have read thousands of books, and most are nothing alike, especially when you get into the great books, the great book series. You know, they have almost so little in common. It is a joke. And so when someone tells me I don't like reading this, or I don't like reading in general, I say, no, you just have not found the right book yet. You haven't opened your mind. Because if I talk to those people, they are watching many different kinds of movies, many different kinds of shows. So they like those styles. It's just that many people have only been able to experience books either through school, or when they did touch upon more fiction style novels, such as fantasy or science fiction, it was childish ones, it was kiddish ones. Even people who they'll read Harry Potter and they go, I don't like fantasy. It's like, look, I love Harry Potter. But Harry Potter is very childish, especially the first couple of books. It is a great series if you are someone who's into that kind of stuff. But Harry Potter is YA, it's young adult. There's fantasy novels just in the same way as anime. Many people, they go, I don't like anime. And they go, I ask them, what do you mean by anime? They go, Dragon Ball Z. Dragon Ball Z is not most anime. You cannot compare Dragon Ball Z to some things like Hunter x Hunter or Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. You know, Attack on Titan. These are brutal, violent anime that delve into very adult themes. And you cannot compare them to Pokemon. And so that's how many people are relating in the book sphere. They read things when they were very young, or were forced to read literature by their teachers, such as that just killed that desire for them. And there's this whole domain outside of their vision that they cannot see because they've only seen this small little part that was forced upon them when they were younger. And so they've completely blocked out the ability to see that other kind of stuff. And it is really sad, because I will argue this black and blue, there is nothing, and I love TV shows, I love anime, I love movies of all different genres. That stuff does not compare to a book. Books make you think in a way that a film or a show simply cannot. Books give you perspective of another human being, another world, another environment in a way that nothing in live action can compare. Just cannot. Books are a different medium completely. And so I want people to like not lose out on that stuff. And I see a lot of people also who could be reading so much more, who are readers, who they slog, they just drag themselves through books because they hear, oh yeah, it's a great series, you got to read it. They force themselves through it, and they go, ugh, and they're not liking it, but they're forcing it. And so instead of reading 4 books that month, they read 1, because they force themselves to read that goddamn book or that series that other people are saying they have to read. No, you don't. No, you don't. YOLO. You only live once. You do not want to be wasting your time on these books, because there are so many books out there, and we simply do not have enough time to read them all. So do not waste your time reading a book that doesn't make you happy, that doesn't make you want to read it. And for people who are not readers, don't waste your time pushing yourself through that boring book. Just jump to the next one until you find what you like, until you find a book where you're just like, fuck, finally, I kind of like this. And then until maybe you'll get to a book that's not amazing, that's not like, you're not throwing yourself through in a second, but it's good enough that you actually do finish that one book in a month. This really depends on the context of your situation. If you're someone who never reads and you finally find a book that's good enough that you're willing to finish it in a month, if you read 12 books in a year or 1 book a month, and before your count was 0 or 1 and it was forced by school, that's incredible, and you'll build up on that. If you're someone who's a big reader and you can read 6 books in a month, but instead of reading 6 you're reading 1 or 2 because you're also forcing yourself through books that don't really impassion you, but you're doing it because someone told you it was good, or you feel bad because you spent money on it, no. Much better to spend your time wisely and with enjoyment. A perfect example for me is the Mistborn series. I love Brandon Sanderson. His Stormlight Archive is probably my number 1 or number 2 series right now, that I just love it. And I enjoy the first Mistborn book. I really do. I enjoy the first Mistborn book, Final Empire, but the second book, I don't. I just don't. Vin, I think is the main character's name, the female main character, just doesn't interest me. I loved the protagonist in the first book. He was actually interesting. I followed him, and his interaction with her was really great. As soon as he's gone, and then you follow through in the second book, I just lost interest. Should I force myself through the book because people say I should? Why? Why should I? There are so many fantasy books out there to read that it doesn't make sense for me to be forcing myself through the second book just because people say I should. Doesn't make sense. So this is really a shout out to everybody saying, depending on what side of the fence you are, a reader or a big reader or someone who doesn't read at all, just make sure that when you are taking the time to try to read something, never allow other people's opinions to force yourself through a book. Don't read unless you enjoy it. Now, I understand, obviously, some people would be like, I'm still in school, I have to read this book. Understandable. Learn to read better. And that's really it. I see people trying to teach people how to read faster or speed read. I hate this. Okay, you do not speed read. If you enjoy a book, if you like a book, you do not speed read through it. Okay? What you can do is, if you're reading a book that is necessary for you to read scholastically or for a project or whatever, but that you don't like, then learn how to take better notes and skim through. That's one thing. That's a completely different subject. But for people who are trying to like learn how to read faster through books that they actually like, why? I despise that concept. Okay? Either you're skimming for a very specific reason, like school or project, or take the time to actually just enjoy the book you're reading. If you're not enjoying it, then you don't need to read it. There's no reason to read it faster, because if you like a book, the speed will come. The speed naturally comes. If the speed is slow, now for sure some of it is habit. Some people haven't been reading much, so they don't get through a book as fast as someone else. But that's just a matter of time, which will fade, because if you only focus on reading books you're actually enjoying, you will naturally pick up speed. And then as that time goes on, you'll get more into the habit of reading more, and then magically you read faster in general. Many of the people who read quick, it's because we all have a tendency to, like, I believe, skip lines or we see a scene or a setting that's being described and our brain naturally knows that this is not important information, we kind of skip over it. Or our eyes we're just able to filter information much faster. It's a matter of experience and time. It has nothing to do with like a skill set. Obviously I know that there's skill like speed reading, but I find it offensive. I just find it offensive to so many degrees. So I'm gonna try to keep this short. We're at 15 minutes already. But for people out there, like I said, if you are not a reader, keep trying, keep going, because I honestly truly believe that there's no better thing to have in your life than a good book. And there's millions of books. So it's impossible that you will not find something you enjoy. You cannot enjoy something. And for people who are readers, don't let yourself waste your time reading through books that don't actually make you feel good. It's not worth it. There's so many books out there. We don't have time for this bullshit. Okay? You're better off, and this is for both sides of the fence, you are much better off, much better off, rereading the same book that you love over and over again and pulling new bits of information out of it than to force yourself through books you do not enjoy or books that are subpar. Okay? I've learned so much more just rereading great books that I love, because I go through it and I'm able to start piecing out like really great philosophy and ideas and thoughts. So think about it. If you disagree, agree, you want to share about it, let me know down below. Comment, subscribe, like, check out the website geeksnbarbells.com. Check out the podcast, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. Check out everything. Yeah, I got nothing else. Kind of tired, people, but I'm going to keep going. Everybody, power to us, and peace.